Today on Sports Central, we go over our next team prediction of this offseason. And this could be over a team that I definitely think should go right back to being a major contender in the 2021 season. And that's going to be the Penn State Nittany Lions. This team is 4-5 overall in the 2020 season. Definitely, I'd say Penn State was one of, if not the most disappointing team in the Big Ten last season, as this team just was a mess for a good chunk of last season, but they greatly improved over the course of 2020. And I mean, if you look at this team, they started out the season 0-4, in which, I mean, this team was a total disaster in the first few weeks. I'm not sure what happened there for Penn State, because, I mean, if you look at 2019, this Penn State team was one of the best teams in the Big Ten. And so you go into 2020 with a lot of hype. I mean, you had a great returning production set. So I'm just not sure what went wrong there in your first 5 games. I mean, this team just looked very unmotivated and just did not have the energy that we saw in 2019 for sure. But there's a ton of improvement over 2020 for this team. I mean, this team was definitely one of, if not the most improved team in the nation last season. I mean, they started the season once again 0-4 record in their first 4 games, and they finished out the season 4-1. Also with 4 straight wins there in between the late parts of November and into December. This team beat Michigan 27-17. That was a big win there, finally getting their first win of the season. Then they beat Rutgers 23-7. I mean, Rutgers was halfway decent last season, so that was not a terrible well, that was a pretty good win there for sure. Also beat Michigan State 39-24, and they blew out Illinois to finish out the season for them. 56-21 was their final score there. So for Penn State, overall, good season. I mean, especially in the last half, this team definitely improved. So, I mean, it is safe to say that this Penn State team should be right back to being a legit contender next season. It just was a mighty fluke, I think, for this team in the first 5 weeks. But looking at your roster preview going to next season, I mean, this is a total reason to believe that this team is going to be definitely a big contender in the Big Ten next season. I mean, they've got outstanding returning production. Sean Clifford's coming back. In 2020, he was kind of down. I mean, in 2019, he played outstanding. Definitely was one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten, as he put up 2,600 yards and 23 touchdowns in 2019. 2020 wasn't quite as good for him. I mean, his completion rate was slightly better, but he put up 1,800 yards, 16 touchdowns, and threw 2 more interceptions in 2020 than he did in 2019. But otherwise, I think Sean Clifford definitely, if he can just improve this offseason, I mean, he could be a huge asset, or he is a huge asset, but he could be an even better asset for this team going into 2021. So watch out for him next season. He is definitely a player to watch out for. Kevon Lee is also coming back. He is a major player for this team, put up 500 yards last season for the Nittany Lions, which those are actually some really good stats for this team. I mean, you got to remember, Penn State only played 9 games last season, and Kevon Lee put up 500 yards through those 9 games. You also got Devin Ford coming back, so you got 2 of your top running backs coming back for next season. The backfield looks pretty good for this team. Receiving core also looks really good. I mean, Jahan Dotson is coming back. Parker Washington is coming back. Jahan Dotson especially is going to be a key player for this team next season. He put up 900 yards and 8 touchdowns in 2020. Washington put up 500 yards as well, so you don't want to forget about him. Pratt Freiermuth is not going to be back, though. He was your start tight end. He's definitely going to have a bright future in the NFL. But he put up 300 yards last season and also a touchdown, so he was definitely a weapon for this team and for Sean Clifford. But that will be a tough loss there for sure. I mean, in the tight end position, that's probably going to be your toughest loss for sure. Micah Parsons, of course, he's not going to be back for this team next season as he's headed to the NFL. And then, of course, he lost 2 offensive linemen, 2 defensive linemen as well. And then he also lost 2 in the secondary. So defensively, this team is losing 5. So that is something you got to watch out for. But anyway, brings up the question, was 2020 just one bad season? I really do think so. I mean, if you look at Penn State, this team, it was just kind of confusing how this team was as bad as they were at the start of last season, just because, I mean, if you look at their returning production, even from 2019 to 2020, I mean, there is no reason to believe that Penn State was not going to be a good team next season. Like, many analysts, including myself, had pretty high expectations for Penn State, and this team just did not play well at all in their first 4 games. But I definitely think 2020 was just one bad season for this team. I mean, Penn State should be right back to being a contender next season, just based off of the returning production alone. I'm much more confident in Penn State going to next season than I was in 2019, even going into 2020. So, but yeah, this team is definitely, I think, a big contender in the Big Ten East. And I think, I mean, Ohio State's obviously going to be a tough opponent, but I think Penn State definitely has got an ability to possibly rival up Ohio State once again in that Big Ten East. But I definitely think this team is a big contender. I mean, I'm not sure about college football playoff contender for next season, but I definitely think this team is worthy of definitely being towards the top of that Big Ten East division. Looking at your schedule, though, for next season, of course, you start off the season against Wisconsin. Tough game there to start off your season. Wisconsin next season should be a top team in the Big Ten West for sure. Ball State, you got them then on September 11th. Then you got Auburn, of course, as well. So, I mean, looking at your non-conference games are actually pretty difficult. I mean, Ball State was not terrible last year. Auburn is a good team. They're an SEC opponent. Villanova should be a win. But otherwise, I mean, you got a couple of tougher non-conference games there. But looking at your first 4 games here, Wisconsin, I got to go with a loss on that one just because Wisconsin next season I definitely think should be right back to being a major contender in the Big Ten. And it's also on the road too. I think in Madison, with that game being in Wisconsin, that's going to make it a much tougher matchup than it could be for Penn State. So I'm going to say Penn State takes a loss there, but it's going to be very close. A very close matchup. I could easily see that going either way. Ball State, that's going to be a win. Villanova's also going to be a win. Both of those games should be easier wins. Auburn's going to be a close one for sure. I could easily see that game going either way, but Penn State's at home. Auburn in general next season is somewhat young, so I'm going to go with Penn State there in that matchup. 3-1 is the record for Penn State going into your October. Here's what we're looking at for the October month. Indiana's going to be a tough one there. I think Indiana next season is definitely going to be a top team in the Big Ten East as well. I mean, you got Penn State, Indiana, and Ohio State. For sure your top 3 teams in the Big Ten East next season. It should be a total bloodbath to see who gets the top spot in that division because, I mean, Indiana and Michael Penix, they are definitely capable of winning the division next season. Ohio State has just won it for however many years in a row. And, of course, you got Penn State who's been in the background for like pretty much each year of the past decade for the matter of the Big Ten East. But looking at that Iowa game, that's going to be a tough one as well. I mean, we've seen troubles with Penn State in Iowa City in the past. I do think Penn State gets the win, though. It's going to be close, but I'm going to give Penn State the win. Illinois is going to be a win. Illinois is going to be a mess next season, so I'm not going to really say much about that game there. Then you got Ohio State. That's going to be the last game of October there. That's going to be a tough one, especially if Penn State's towards the top of the division. I mean, that could very possibly determine the overall winner of the Big Ten East. So, very crucial game there in Columbus, and it's pretty unfortunate you got to travel to Ohio State in that matchup, but I got to give the Buckeyes the win there. I mean, until Ohio State loses the Big Ten East and until Ohio State doesn't make it to the Big Ten championship game, I just don't think there's any reason to believe that Ohio State's streak is going to end. I mean, that team has got so much talent once again next season. They're definitely going to be a very talented team. Then for your November, you're going to go 6-2 through your first 2 months, losses to Wisconsin and Ohio State. Last month is very favorable for Michigan or for Penn State. I mean, if you look at Maryland and Michigan and Rutgers and Michigan State as well, I mean, all 4 of those games are extremely winnable. You've got 2 road games as well in that month, but I'm not really too concerned about it. I'd say all 4 of those games are wins. Maryland could be a close one. I mean, coming off of that Ohio State game and having to go right back on the road to Maryland, Maryland could be a decent team next season as well. That's going to be a close one, but I think Penn State gets the win. Michigan, Rutgers, Michigan State, all 3 of those I do expect to be pretty easy wins for Penn State, and that's going to be good for Penn State because they're going to have a hot streak going into the postseason. So that's definitely going to be a big factor for this team. But 10-2 is going to be a record prediction. I don't think this team really quite makes it to the Big Ten championship game next season. They're definitely once again going to be a big contender in that Big Ten East, but I've got Ohio State currently winning the division. I just think once again, I mean, until Ohio State doesn't win that division, I mean, there's just no reason to believe that the Buckeyes are going to fall off anytime soon. But yeah, 10-2, that would be an outstanding record for Penn State next season, especially after coming off of a 4-5 season in 2020. But let me know your thoughts and comments below on the Nittany Lions. I do appreciate you guys all watching. If you enjoyed the video, slap a like on it, subscribe as well, as it does help out the channel, and I'd really appreciate that. But once again, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. I'll see you guys later.